Welcome to bharatshakti.in. Today we'll be talking about the 1971 War of Independence of Bangladesh. It was a great war, and it was one of those rare wars in which a nation was born, in which we actually reached the point of conflict termination exactly as per the geopolitical requirements of the leadership of both countries, Bangladesh and India. There are many issues to recall in this war. I would just recall two such dates which are historic. On the 7th of March 71, Sheikh Mujib delivered his famous address at the Ramana race course where he gave out the call for non-cooperation movement. He did not really call for any violence at all. On the 26th March is the day when the Bangladesh people commemorate the country's declaration of independence by the leader of the nation, Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. Proclamation of Bangladeshi independence in March 71 led to a 9-month-long Bangladesh liberation war. Mukti Bahini had a huge role to play in it. Along with Mukti Bahini were the Indian Armed Forces. Though we'll focus primarily on the Mukti Bahini today, I understand it's not possible to narrate the whole story without reference to the Indian Army. I have with me two esteemed Bangladeshi citizens and also an Indian guest. We have the Honorable Member of Bangladesh Parliament, Jatiya Sanshad. I will be referring to it more as Parliament since our viewers are more used to that terminology. Aroma Datta. She was a young girl in 1971 who also witnessed the atrocities that were perpetuated by the Pakistani Armed Forces. She's now a parliamentarian. Welcome to bharatshakti.in, ma'am. Welcome. I have with me Brigadier Apte. He's an artillery officer of the Indian Army. He fought in Bangladesh. He's also a strategic analyst, and I must say he's from my regiment since I am also an artillery officer. Welcome, Brigadier Apte. Welcome to bharatshakti.in. The way we'll go about this discussion, ladies and gentlemen, is that I'll give you the first 5 minutes to be putting across your views, your perception of the Bangladesh battle for liberation, the role of Mukti Bahini in it. I will ask the lady to first start.
Greetings from Bangladesh, and I very much welcome you today on the very eve of the birth centenary of our father of the nation, Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. I also pay tribute to all martyrs, civilians, army personnel from Bangladesh and India, general mass people, and women who had to give up their everything as a huge cost for liberating a new nation, Bangladesh. Today also is a very significant day because we have entered into the 50th year of independence from 1971 to 2021. This is a very significant and day to day to speak out from my heart and with all informations which I was a witness during the War of Liberation. I basically come from a political family. My grandfather, Dhirendranath Datta, was the deputy leader of the House of United India. He was the first man to demand Bangla in the Constituent Assembly in Pakistan in 1948 on 24th of February where the whole language movement initiated, which was taken up by our father of the nation, who gave a structural, institutional shape to take it to a movement, which culminated today where we are as an independent nation as Bangladesh. This is very interesting in the sense that during the liberation period, I just mentioned that I was in Dhaka University as a student. In 70, there were two very significant, incidences. One was the cyclone, the 70 cyclone, which shook the conscience of the people of Bangladesh to begin with, because millions of people were killed and there was no support whatsoever from the capital, from Rawalpindi. There was no support, no help. So it was basically the common people and the political leader led by Bangabandhu taken the move to salvage that kind of a situation. Then came the election, the 70 election, which was the major turning point. And in the election, Awami League won out of 300 seats. 162 seats were allocated for East Pakistan, and 160 seats was owned by Awami League under the leadership of Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. Now, the whole issue crops up. The issue which shook our conscience, that the battle started for sharing the power on the basis of the constitution. And negotiations were going on between Yaita, Bhutto, and Bangabandhu, how to transfer the power. They systematically took time, very much took time, to organize a war against the innocent, normal mass people of the East Pakistan and on the politicians, which we could apprehend to some extent, but not to fully extent. Because we took the democratic line, Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman took the democratic line to settle down the issue, and which you all know that at one point it failed. And then after failing of that, Bangabandhu was very much trying his level best, because he didn't want to see bloodshed. But then the situation was deteriorating, and on the 7th of March in 1971, in the recourse Maidan of Dhaka, Bangabandhu delivered his 18 minutes 31 seconds, the historical speech, which is the speech recorded in the history of the world, where he categorically cleared the position of him and Awami League. He invited Mr. Bhutto and Mr. Yahya to come into terms, and if they don't, then he clearly declared that in Bangla he said, এবারের সংগ্রাম মুক্তির সংগ্রাম, এবারের সংগ্রাম স্বাধীনতার সংগ্রাম. And then he also said, রক্ত যখন দিয়েছি, রক্ত আরো দেব, এই দেশকে মুক্ত করে ছাড়বো ইনশাআল্লাহ. But then he also said, please, you go back to your barracks and settle peacefully for transferring the power.
If we'll get on to Brigadier after, sir. Can we have your views, your impressions, etc.? And can I ask you to keep it a little concise, sir?
Thank you, Brigadier Chatterjee. Madam has already given an excellent overview of what led to the turmoil and what led to the war that commenced. It was a war of revolution, a country which wanted to free itself from the shackles of the West Pakistanis. I was newly commissioned, and soon, within 8 months, I was deployed as part of an artillery regiment. We moved from Nifa to the area of Barrackpur, Calcutta, and Kanchrapara. From there, in September, my battery was deployed close to the border to provide support to the troops that had already amassed on the border. They were our regular army units of the Indian Army. At the same time, as Madam has brought out, the revolutionary movement in East Pakistan had commenced. A lot of East Bengal rifle battalions, a lot of East Pakistani units started defecting. There was a Colonel Osmani and a wing commander Khondkar. Colonel Osmani was heading the entire operations, and wing commander Khondkar was his deputy. A provisional Bangladesh government in exile had been formed in Calcutta, sometimes in March, soon after, as Madam has brought out. And this was in a bungalow on Theatre Road, which is now Shakespeare Sarani in Calcutta. That grew momentum in times to come, and somewhere around July 1971, our Indian Ministry of External Affairs had got this particular item legitimized officially. Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, with her astute leadership, she brought to mobilize world opinion at what Pakistan was actually doing and the atrocities they were putting across to the East Pakistanis. She toured a lot, visited the US, visited Soviet Union, and gradually it started happening that the world opinion was in favor of East Bengal and the atrocities that the Pakistanis had unleashed on them. At the same time, Indian Army units started mobilizing. As is well known, Bangladesh or East Pakistan is an entirely riverine terrain. It required a good logistics build-up. It required good infrastructure build-up, and therefore, very rightly, then General Sam Manekshaw, the Chief of Army Staff of the Indian Army, was not very clear to launch any offensive on the Eastern Front till all the troops and the joint synergy of the Indian Army, Navy, and the Air Force had been achieved. In the meanwhile, the defected battalions of East Pakistan and the Mukti Bahini or the Mukti Jodha started concentrating, and their training was to be done. Number of training camps had been set up, and approximately the force level of the Mukti Bahini or the Mukti Jodha to be trained was about 100,000, which is about 1 lakh. The ratio percentage was approximately 30,000 to fight a conventional war and 70,000 to indulge into guerrilla warfare. The training was carried out in 3 phases. In phase 1 was basically carrying out the basic skills and the training on the border areas and just do a little bit of harassment. In phase 2, which would commence sometime around July, August, move into September, the Mukti Bahini, duly trained would carry out ambushes, do aggressive patrolling, with the help of the Indian artillery, bring down artillery fire, also disrupt communication installations within East Pakistan, and destroy their communication network. In the third phase, it was a proper offensive with the help of the artillery batteries and assist the Indian Army once and when war would be declared. On the Eastern Front, the Indian Army had a four-pronged offensive plan in case war was to be declared. On the western prong was the newly formed two corps under Lieutenant General T. N. Raina. He had under him the 9 Infantry Division, to which I belonged, and 4 Infantry Division. On the northwest, we had 33 Corps under Lieutenant General M. L. Thapan. We had 20 Mountain Division, which fought superbly in the Battle of Hilli. On the northeastern part, we had the 101st Communication Zone under General Gurbaksh Gill, with ad hoc brigades to form a division-level force. And on the eastern prong was General Sagat Singh with the 4 Corps. These 4 prongs had been planned to open up the offensive when the balloon would go up. In
Right,
this,
sir. Can I just interpret?
Yes.
We'll carry on with the operational part of it a little later, sir.
Okay.
First, certain other issues, in case you permit me.
Yeah.
I have a question to you, ma'am, and that question is: moment all this started, and Operation Searchlight was initiated, there was a rush towards the border of people, who were in fear of their life. Some of them have been tortured. Perhaps there were cases of rape, etc. So, were the borders open? Were people allowed to move into India easily? I'm told that you also went perhaps to Tripura and organized certain measures for opening up the borders. Could you just recall all that?
Of course. Thank you. On 28th March, in the middle of the night, the Pakistani armies broke down in our house and arrested my grandfather, Shohid Dhirendranath Datto, and his son, Dilip Datto, and took them to the Moinamoti cantonment. Fortunately, we really don't know why we were not touched, but this is amazing that they left us untouched. Then we managed to flee from our house in Humilla in a safer place on the 29th afternoon. We were hiding there with an expectation that my grandfather was a politician, but my uncle was a simple man. They would have returned him. But in that very afternoon, the people who had given us the refuge came and said that you have to leave now, right now, because we cannot keep you any longer. Already in the parliament, in Lok Sabha, the Prime Minister of India, Honorable Indira Gandhi, has paid tribute to your grandfather as a condolence message with a 1-minute silence, and the Pakistani armies are now looking frantically to identify any of you to take back into the barrack and to give counter statement, and you know what can happen to you and your mother. So you have to now leave. But anyhow, it's a long story. Let me cut this long story. They actually, with their help, we managed to cross the river Gomuti to Agartala by the Shunamura border. Once we reached Shunamura, that was on the 2nd of April, which was a Friday. We managed to reach the Shunamura border, and then the moment we reached there, we were surrounded by some armies instantly, naturally. And then we were crying, and we were telling, my mother and me were crying and telling that we are here to save our lives, so please allow us to get in. And they said, no, we can't let you in. But then I said, okay, can you now just send a message to the police station that we are from the Datta family, Dhirendranath Datta's family. Could they come and identify us and just let us in before we get killed? And they were kind enough, so they went to the Shunamura Thana and brought the OC, and then he just took us in. That's a horrible status we were in then. But that day was a Bandh day in Tripura. By the time my grandfather's two friends already from Brahmanbaria managed to flee on the 26th to Agartala. Then Mr. Sachin Singh was the chief minister of Tripura at that time, who was my grandfather's colleague from the Congress period. And then he immediately had sent his car along with his people to bring us back to Agartala, to the capital. Once we reached there about 1 in the morning, I think I exactly do not remember the timing. It was between 1 or 2 in the morning. The whole place was full of journalists. And then we were in trauma. We were crying, my mother and me. And then I just said, I want to speak to the Prime Minister, Mrs. Indira Gandhi. And the Honorable Chief Minister said, it's very difficult. I said, please, I know she will speak to me. She will speak to me. And after some time, he took up the phone and he tried. And around, I think it's almost 3 in the morning, I got the opportunity to speak to her. And she said, hello, my dear. And I just did burst into tears. And I just say that please open up the borders. I mean, the Pakistani armies are killing people like birds. The armless people are being just forced to die on spot. They have nothing to defend themselves. Please allow to get in India and open up the borders and give refugee status. There were about like half a minute. I didn't hear anything for half a minute. And at one point, after half a minute, she said, my dear, calm down. I will do whatever needs to be done. So don't worry, people will not die. This is my responsibility. And then they had opened up the border from the Agartala, from the Shunamura onwards to Feni. And people from Kumilla, Sylhet, Brahmanbaria, from that whole zone was running to Agartala and became Agartala a center of refugee. So that part was a big part, and my father was then my father was in exile in India. That's another part of the story. He was with the Amrita Bazar Patrika. He was the assistant editor, and my cousin brother, my father's Sanjeev Datta, was with Amrita Bazar, and my cousin brother, who was also with Amrita Bazar, Kollam Chaudhuri, they all rushed, and they took all this information, and the international, what you call the press, started releasing these horror stories, and this is how the beginning of the border opening started, with the support of Mrs. Indira Gandhi.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Which we had a very big role in it.
Thank you so much. I mean, it's so good to get it firsthand from somebody who actually spoke to Mrs. Gandhi and influenced her decision to open the borders, in the bargain saving millions of lives as the days went past. Okay, but all the same, let's carry this whole thing a little further. Brigadier Apte sir, the question for you now, if I may. And, all the same, the Mukti Bahini was a great force, etc. I agree. But They were also facing a very strong army, a very professional army. So Mukti Bahini would have been, there would have been a requirement of consolidating the Mukti Bahini into an organization with something like teams, battalions, etc. So how was the Mukti Bahini ultimately organized for combat? That's my question to you. Whatever you have seen of it, there were those Osman leadership that they had, General Osmani, the other leaders. Uh, how much can you tell us about that?
Yes, in fact, to just take Madam's point of view as a launch pad, the borders were opened all over the East Pakistan and Indian front because I was on the border and we saw millions of refugees just pouring in, and a few of them were able bodied young men or young boys, they must have been in college. So, along with the East Bengal battalions and East Bengal rifles that had defected, these young boys were driven with motivation to fight for the cause of liberation of their country. So, what happened was not only did the borders open, the refugees influx came in. There were a lot of Hindus also who were refugees who were being ill treated by the West Pakistanis, and also a lot of Muslim, Bengali Muslims who had started filtering into India. The East Bengal battalions had defected. They defected with their arms and ammunition. Colonel Osmani that time formed the nucleus along with Wing Commander Khondkar, and they grouped them into various camps starting right from Agartala down, that is from the northeastern borders of India, to where we were, that is the southwest portion where my division was. So basically, the training camps consisted of basic skills in weapons and equipment, in formation, that is the junior most section level, platoon level training, and also, like I mentioned to you earlier, I was just a second lieutenant. For my level, the training that we carried out was basically to teach them how to take artillery shoots, that is, whenever they would have their artillery batteries, or with Indian Army artillery units, which would be there in war as and when it would get declared, if at all. So the training was in these training camps, infantry level training, training on how to put ambushes, how to carry out raids, how to carry out patrolling, reconnaissance patrols, and how to pass back information which could be converted to intelligence. Subsequently, the training focused on going into areas inside and disrupting strategic communications, tactical communications, road communications, causing harassment. This training was approximately for 4 to 5 weeks. As known to me, what happened at the grand strategy level, as planned by General Jacob, the Chief of Staff, and the Eastern Command, frankly, I would not know. But there was a mixture of regular troops of East Pakistan who had defected, and there were a lot of young boys who were willing to join, and they were in large numbers. So it was called Operation Jackpot from India, which was on till 30th November. And all Indian Army units that were compelled to give support to the Mukti Bahini or Mukti Jodha came under the gambit of Operation Jackpot, which also included shaping the battlefield if at all war would break out. So that, in a nutshell, was the concept of training, the organization for combat. And I'll also bring out one point here that most of the East Bengal battalions or East Bengal rifles came with their own equipment and whatever ammunition they could get. But the balance ammunition, and if at all any equipment was required, it was definitely provided by us. And how I know this is because later on, when I met the veterans of the Mukti Bahini and Mukti Jodha during my war veterans visit to Bangladesh in 2010, during my interaction, I got to know this. So
Right.
this,
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much, sir. We will come back to you a little later. To get back to you, ma'am, uh, uh, like let's take off from wherever the Brigadier Apte is left, and he talked about lots of young boys coming across the border, lots of them getting recruited. Uh, can you tell us about women in Mukti Bahini? You have awarded Veer Pratik to some of those the ladies of those days, much later, but they must have had a big role. Can we have the story?
Of course. Uh, it's interesting in the sense that from the very beginning, uh, from the 60s, since the 6 point, women were in the streets along with men, students. I was one of them, like hundreds and thousands of us, from capital to the district level, particularly, I mean, the young group, as uh, Brigadier Apte has mentioned, uh, and women started to get deeply involved in the politics and had taken a very strong role from the nascent phase of 71. We were very deeply involved in all the movements, and which culminated from 66 to 71, and women were in the forefront with men at the same time. During liberation, before liberation, I mean, there were some training given to women. Uh, Arms training was given to women, just to, how would I say, to experiment, not to experiment, to ensure that they can handle arms, not they don't get scared of arms, but arms is now a necessity because
Any
their
eventuality,
arms.
for an eventuality.
Exactly. It's a
For an
mental, I
eventuality.
mean, kind of a thing, yeah.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
I mean,
definitely.
you understand because women are not used to, I mean, handle arms. Maybe Jhansi Rani, she did that time, but I think we were followers of Jhansi Rani Lakshmibai. So
No,
what
very much.
happened was, very much, and we are the daughters of Pritilota. So you can imagine we are always on the forefront for liberating our independence from the very beginning, from British period onwards. As a matter of fact, what I was going, I can go for nights together, never mind. So when we started, women, men, all as Brigadier Apte has mentioned, that men, women, young groups went to Indian border, crossed Indian border and went to India. And then Indian government decided, as it is your subject to explain further. I know quite a bit, but I would like to hear more authentic, issues about how you have formed. So then there was training center. Training was given directly, arms training was given directly to women on that side. On the other hand, it's very interesting that women who were not even trained, who never took part in any of those movements, but simple women like an agriculturalist, Barir Bo, I mean, just a woman who were very young, they were deeply involved with the Mukti Bahinis. And they were actually like Kakun Bibi, Taramon Bibi, I'm sure you have heard their
Yeah,
names.
yeah,
And there were many of them at the remotest areas where they were actually smuggling arms and hiding arms for the Mukti Bahinis, which was amazing. They were feeding the women. They are also warriors. They are also, I call them warriors. Those salute to them. They were hiding the Mukti Bahini's arms in their haystacks. They were feeding. Even they don't have food for them, but they were feeding the Mukti Bahinis, and they got deeply involved.
right.
And I know, I'm sure, just to mention that one of my friend, uh, I'm sure you know her name, Shirin Banu Mitil, she was recognized by the statesman at one point. She actually disguised as a man and was with the men's camp to fight with guns. But then she was caught and then she was sent back to give training. So women were deeply, deeply involved. But I would
Right.
like to also talk about the 10th of April issue. I'll touch on upon that. But I salute all women, and particularly the grassroots women who had taken the grenades, the rifles in their hands to support the Mukti Bahinis and the Indian armies. Thank you.
Right. One question to you, Brigadier Apte, and can you give us one operation, small operation? And okay, you'll have to keep it brief because we are terribly behind schedule in spite of not having one of our members with us today. And I'm talking about joint operations, maybe Tangail, Paradrop, etc. Any of these joint operations which was handled with which saw the detailed involvement of Mukti Bahini is also our forces.
Okay, like in our sector, because yes, I will cover as far as the Tangail operations were concerned, though that was not within my sector. That was
Anything that you like to cover, any one, sir.
yeah. The Tangail offensive was a classic one. It was an airborne offensive planned with a battalion group of 50 independent para brigade of the Indian Army, and it had a parachute battalion with a parachute field battery of the artillery and all allied resources. Uh, there was the Tiger Siddiqui was contacted, and he played a vital role in arranging for the logistics and other infrastructure for the paradrop of the talent group. He was also in tandem working with the Indian Army that how exactly he would assist in the offensive operations by trying to deny the withdrawing Pakistanis to fall back onto Dhaka. The capture of Pugli Bridge, of course, the Indian Army did, but the Mukti Bahini, as part of the joint synergy, did take part, and that was to a great extent of great support. That is one. But in the other part, in my sector, in the Jessore Khulna sector, uh, in shaping the battlefield, we had one or two operations like the battle at Garibpur, launched by one of our infantry battalions and the armor squadron. The Mukti Bahini were there, and exactly they also participated in giving the due support. Similarly, in the offensive on Jessore, when we finally captured it on 7th early morning, we did find Mukti Bahini in some support between Jingargacha and Jessore. So wherever the strategic plan involved, their synergy required, and that exactly would be known best at the command headquarters level. I'm sure it was carried out, and they actually became a force multiplier to the Indian Army in their war for liberation of Bangladesh.
Right. Thank you. If I can just go, ma'am, you said you want to talk something about.
I just want to touch upon the 10th of April 71. This was a very interesting turning point when uh, Mr. Tajuddin Ahmed, who fled with his leaders of Army League, went to Mrs. Indira Gandhi that they required legal support, the absolute support to provide all kind of military and refugee status, everything. Refugee status was already given, but for military support, Mrs. Gandhi categorically told Mr. Tajuddin that unless and until I have agreement between state to state, I cannot provide any support. So it has to be a state to state relationship, bilateral relationship, diplomatic and bilateral relationship. Within that context, this is Tajuddin Ahmed, they actually prepared a constitution, which was a constitution for Bangladesh, and then they went to Mrs. Gandhi, and then the proclamation of independence order was issued on April 10th from Mujibnagar and made effective from March 26, 1971 through forming government in exile. This is important, so that there is a government in exile where Indian government can support from all aspects. So this
Right.
was very, very crucial. So which has given the war a new
Right.
dimension, so that the armies and the government can intervene. So without legal intervention, it wasn't possible for Indian government to provide the support from the Indian armies as a joint force, because that was
Let me take
needed
off.
also. Okay.
Let me take off from what you were saying. And this is my
Okay.
last question to both of you on this
Okay.
issue. I'll come to you later, ma'am. And firstly to you, Brigadier Apte. Like she was talking about this bilateral relationship and joint forces, etc., all that that we've been hearing. These two forces, Mukti Bahini and the Indian Army, they fought together. They won a huge objective together that possibly provides a huge, strong plan for military to military relationship of the Bangladesh and the Indian Army, like we do for many other countries. And that this military to military relationship can also drive our bilateral relationship forward, that between India and Bangladesh. So, what would you have to say on that, Birapte?
Chatterjee, if you just permit me to make a small point on what Madam has put across,
Sure, sir.
there were two
Sure.
important points which the Mukti Bahini did as tremendous force multipliers. Number one, they had put so much of scare in the Pakistan forces that when we captured Flight Lieutenant Parvez Bedi, I was witness to it. He ejected over my gun position. I have blindfolded him. He was he and Khalil Ahmed pleaded to us when we captured them that we should not hand them over to the Mukti Bahini. That was the fear which had been instilled in the Pakistan Army and Navy and Air Force. The other one was the Mukti Bahini had trained 400 commandos, naval commandos, who actually did frogmen work, and they did a great job in destroying nearly 15 Pakistan Navy ships. They also mounted gunboats and actually destroyed a lot of the port facilities, which enabled the Indian Army to carry out a small amphibious operation at the Cox's Bazar. So I think that was a major contributing factor of the Mukti Bahini. Now, to answer your question, definitely yes. Bilateral relations have grown since 1971 December, once Bangladesh was uh, structured. I have been senior instructor and instructor at the School of Artillery. I am very proud to tell you that I have trained Bangladeshi officers. And when I went in 2010 in the first Indian Armed Forces Veterans Delegation to Dhaka, I was very happy to meet the brigadier there. He was commanding an artillery brigade, and he came across and told me, he said, "Sir, I was a second lieutenant in the Bangladesh artillery, and you were my senior instructor." I have a picture with him and his wife and my wife, and he was so kind. He said, "Sir, I got to know you are coming. I recognized," I said, "this must be the same person who taught me," and he gave us excellent gifts. The manner in which we were received by the Bangladesh Army, Navy, and the Air Force, by their president, by the prime minister, and the manner in which we were taken around to Comilla and to other infantry formations, I think it's a wonderful opportunity for excellent bilateral relations and platforms between our two nations who think alike and who have the same synergy and momentum that was there in the 71 war. I definitely believe that this is an ideal launch pad to enhance our bilateral relations at not only the military level, but even at the political and diplomatic level, and ensure that we as peoples of India and Bangladesh can forge this relationship into a win-win-win situation all over.
Thank you, sir. In fact, let me also share with you a little bit. I was in the war college, and every course we used to have one or the other officer from Bangladesh Army joining the senior command course, and most of them used to spend a lot of time with me in my office because I was also a Bengali. At times, it was just to skip a class and have a chat with me. Uh, Thank you very much. Thank you, Brigadier Apte. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you both for being with us, and
Thank you
thank you,
so much.
and thank
Thank
you,
you.
Brigadier
Long live.
Apte. Thank you so much.
Long
Thank
live
you.
our relationship. Long live our Bangladesh India relationship.